The war in Ukraine has definitely shaken up the prevailing European order. European leaders have implemented policies and sanctions that were simply inconceivable before the war. From sanctions on Russia's central bank and individuals through to the suspension of Nord Stream 2 and Russia's suspension from SWIFT. Yet these moves are just the beginning. For one, European leaders have announced that they have the intention to collectively rearm, a tectonic shift in European history. So we thought it would be a good idea. European army, or something to that effect, has a long history. It was first dreamed up back in the 1950s after World War II, and after the Korean War, fought between the Soviet-backed communist North Korea and the US-backed capitalist South Korea. America decided that West Germany needed to be rearmed to avoid a similar conflict with its eastern counterpart. The obvious option here was for West Germany to join NATO, but that would have involved West Germany having its own army. For obvious reasons, the French weren't too keen on this. So instead, in 1952, America and the French government proposed the European Defence Community via the Treaty of Paris, which would have combined the armies of all of the members of the European Coal and Steel Community: France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg into one supranational command, with the intention of forming a political union in the future. The French Parliament, however, didn't like the idea of giving up national control of their army and refused to ratify the treaty in August 1954, and in the end, West Germany just ended up joining NATO. In the 1960s, though, Charles de Gaulle tried to reform the European Economic Community into a security alliance of sorts, in large part because he didn't think that European and American interests always aligned. As such, de Gaulle took France out of NATO's command structure in 1966, contradicted America by taking a pro-Arab stance in the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, and then twice vetoed Britain's application to the EEC, knowing that Britain would never sign up to his European security project. Unfortunately for de Gaulle, though, other EEC members preferred their American security umbrella in the form of NATO, and as such, his plans failed and ended up falling by the wayside for a number of decades. In recent years, though, the idea has had a resurgence, and the most vocal proponent of an exclusive European security arrangement has been, yet again, the French president, but this time Emmanuel Macron. Like de Gaulle, Macron believes that European and American security interests too often diverge, and saw Trump-era policies as a major strategic difference. In 2018, on a visit to the former Western Front to mark the centenary of the World War I armistice, Macron stressed that Europeans cannot be protected without a true European army. Since then, Macron has consistently called for a bolstered European defence, under the buzzword strategic autonomy from NATO. In 2019, Macron went one further, describing NATO as brain dead in a now infamous interview with The Economist. So why hasn't Europe united militarily yet? Well, Macron has come up against the same problems that plagued Oriol with the Treaty of Paris in 1952 and de Gaulle in the 1960s. Firstly, NATO. Ever since NATO's formation, European leaders have been worried that a European army or defence union would end up just duplicating what Europe already has under NATO, and possibly even undermining NATO by annoying the Americans. European governments have also been more than happy to rely on the US and its massive defence budget for security guarantees, while simultaneously cutting their own military spending. Then comes the politics. A European Defence Union or European Army would ultimately see domestic defence resources given up to a supranational organisation, opening up the possibility of national soldiers being deployed against their own country's interests. For understandable reasons, European publics, especially those with large armies like France and Britain, have never been keen on the idea of giving up national control of their militaries. As we saw in the Brexit referendum, being seen to hand over even partial control of your national army is not always a vote winner. The final issue is Germany. As both Europe's largest and richest country, any European army would require a lot of resources from Germany. But until recently, Germany has been reluctant to substantially remilitarize, let alone join some European super army. Of course, this has changed with Olaf Scholz's pivot to a new era of German military spending, something we actually covered in another video. None of this is to say that Europe hasn't made some moves towards a common defense policy. Europe has occasionally dabbled with independent security, from the Western European Union through the Petersburg talks and the Berlin Plus agreement, culminating with the Common Security and Defense Policy, which is still in place today. The CSDP, in the European Commission's own words, offers a framework for cooperation between EU member states, within which the EU can conduct operational missions with the aim of peacekeeping and strengthening international security in third countries by relying on civil and military assets provided by EU member states. Putting aside the slightly wishy-washy definition, the key operative word is the first one: framework. As a framework, the CSDP doesn't actively or legally bind EU militaries, just lets them discuss it. The actual closest thing that the EU has to an army is Frontex, formerly the European Border and Coast Guard Agency. At its heart, Frontex has one key task: to protect Europe's, or more precisely the Schengen area's, borders. Until very, very recently, Frontex had no power to recruit a force of its own. It merely relied on resources from member states, which it then pooled. Since 2021 though, Frontex has had its own uniformed service in its standing cause, but their role is still extremely limited, and Frontex goes to pains to stress that their agents work under the command of the national authorities of the country they're deployed in. Anyway, with Scholz and Germany now on board with increased defence spending, on March 11th, the EU 27 heads of states agreed to the Versailles Declaration. The declaration has three dimensions: reducing energy dependencies, building up a more robust economic base, and most importantly for this video, bolstering EU defence capabilities. The declaration highlighted how, in the view of the challenges we face, and in order to better protect our citizens, we must resolutely invest more and better into defence capabilities. We therefore agree to increase substantially defence expenditures, with defence capabilities deployed in a collaborative way within the European Union. And European Council President Charles Michel highlighted how actions taken by the EU and its member states since the Russian invasion of Ukraine marked the birth of a European defence. In a thinly veiled dig at NATO, a triumphant Macron declared that we can no longer depend on others to feed us, care for us, uniform us, and finance us. We cannot let others defend us, whether on land, at sea, under the sea, in the air, in space, or in cyberspace. Our European defence must take a new step. While it's too early to know precisely what shape this new EU security agreement will take, this could be the first step on the road to a true European